living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Would you like to change your difficult relationship? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. I don't know of anybody that wouldn't answer that question with a great big yes. But the thing is, how do you do that? I hear from people essentially every day who are struggling in difficult relationships, broken marriages or other kind of relationships. And, they say, I've tried this and I've tried this and I've tried this and my spouse won't change or my spouse won't do this and I'm miserable. Well, Carla Downing, my guest today, specializes in difficult relationships. Carla Downing is the founder of ChangeMyRelationship.com. She's a speaker, an author, a counselor, and a Bible study teacher. She and her husband have been married for over 40 years, but for the first 20, it was a very difficult relationship. I know that the things Carla and I talk about in this conversation will change your relationship if you take them to heart and put them into practice. The things that Carla teaches go right to the heart of why our relationships are difficult, but beyond that, actually give practical relationship-changing principles so that it does not remain the same. And that is the really good news. You don't have to be stuck in a difficult relationship. Now, does that mean that your relationship will become perfect? Only God knows. But you are not stuck. That's the point. And I cannot wait to share this conversation with you so that you can see what you can do in a difficult relationship. It's not hopeless, but you will probably have to change your focus. And Carla Downing can help you know exactly what that looks like. I don't want to wait any longer. Here is my conversation about difficult relationships with Carla Downing. Well, Carla Downing, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us on our program today. And the topic of difficult relationships, wow, I hear about this all the time. Just a huge thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah. Just for our listeners who haven't become familiar with you already, give us a picture of how you came to this topic. You've been open that your marriage did not start out easy. You were in a difficult relationship, but you've been married now for over 40 years. So give us a little of that story.
Yes. Well, I was raised in a home with an alcoholic, abusive father, a Christian mother who brought us to church every Sunday. And my dad got sober when I was 17. And I thought, oh, yay, when I marry my husband now, that's put behind me. We're going to have a great marriage. I met him in church. It seemed like a real God thing. We got married 5 months from the day we met. That included planning a wedding. So it wasn't a whole lot of time in there. And I was shocked to find out that my dysfunctional background in my home was brought into my marriage along with his dysfunctional background. And so we ended up having a very difficult marriage that I had to navigate through. I'm really grateful because God has turned that into a ministry, and I feel very privileged.
Well, you have said so much just in those few sentences that we could unpack. And I'm just going to launch right in with some of the questions that I hear from people in difficult relationships that you've already mentioned that we can talk about. Let's start with the family of origin issues. You mentioned how you grew up. Unpack for a bit how the way you come to marriage without even knowing the baggage you may be carrying, how does that impact your relationship?
Well, first of all, the role that you take on in a dysfunctional family, you bring the same role into your marriage. I was the responsible child. I took care of my mom, my siblings. I protected my mom. I was the voice that spoke truth in my family. So when I got into my marriage and I found out that I ended up having difficulties, my husband was not raging angry, but very passive aggressive and emotionally abusive. I responded to that exactly the way that I did in in my home, which was try to talk, try to explain, try to lecture, try to convince him to change, try to call light to it. So I became very obsessive about that. He brought the same patterns that he learned from his father in terms of how to not interact or interact in a relationship, the manipulation, the pressure, the same role of the husband being the domineering one who would tell his wife what to do. So we both brought those roles in, and we immediately clashed. So whatever role it is that somebody has in their family of origin, the dynamics, the things that they are super reactive to and sensitive to from the things that happened in the past, often our reactivity has nothing to do with what's going on in the present, but everything to do with what happened in the past.
Mm. So you were trying to control him. He was trying to dominate you. I can't imagine a setup for more just friction and misery.
And we were both type A's and firstborns to boot. So that ended up making it even worse.
What did you have to learn? You've alluded to you were trying to change him. I take it from how you've said that didn't work out so well.
I spent 20 years trying to change him with all my triple type A personality. And then I've spent the last 20 years turning all those efforts and the lessons that I've learned into a ministry. This part is much more enjoyable than the first 20 years. So the first thing that I learned is, I didn't want to give up the hope that I had to try to make him change. But the harder I pushed, the more he resisted. The more I pushed, the more obsessed and crazy I got with it. The more I reacted to what he was doing, I became a part of the problem. And then I got confused. Well, maybe it isn't all just him. Maybe it is me. Then I felt guilty. Then I would just, all this vacillation and the stuff that I was doing made the things so much more confusing. And as far as like speaking the truth, I was really good at speaking the truth, but not in a very calm way. I had way too many words. Instead of saying one sentence that I've learned to do now directly and to the point, and then say it and walk away and let that work in his heart and mind, I would give lectures, and they were hours-long lectures. And so there was just too much of a desperate need to try to force him to change that caused me to, with the intensity, to put way too much focus on that and not really living my own life and focusing on what do I need and how do I take care of myself.
Mm-hmm. The idea of trying to change your spouse, I would say that probably 95% of those in a troubled marriage who write to me in some way are looking for a way to change their spouse. You now in your ministry and in your writing, you talk about 10 relationship changing principles, and one of them is change yourself, not them.
Right. Exactly. Because you have to take the focus off of that obsession with changing that person in order to turn it back on yourself. You're admitting powerlessness to change somebody. At the same time, when you turn the light back on yourself to say, what is it that I can do to make things different? You're also freeing up possibility. So when I say change yourself, not them, I'm not saying give up the actual abilities you do have, which is to focus on your part, but also figure out what do you need to take care of yourself? What are you afraid of? What fears are blocking you from taking steps you need to take? And then when we are desperately focusing on trying to force another person to change, we are not allowing ourselves to do what we need to do by looking at our boundaries. As long as we're saying, I have to change you, and you're desperate to make that person change, you're not stepping back and saying, if that person doesn't change, what am I willing to do and not willing to do about that? And by that frees you up to kind of take your own power back and set some really healthy boundaries that can actually spur change better than all of those crazy, intense focusing efforts that you're doing with trying to force somebody to change.
Sometimes I hear people think of or talk about boundaries as another way to change your spouse, but you're talking about it as It's a decision you're making regardless of what the other person does. The purpose is not to try to get them to change.
No, boundaries are really the reason we avoid setting boundaries is because we don't want to get to those difficult decisions about if things are like this, then what am I willing to do or not willing to do? Those are really, really tough choices. That takes a lot of strength, a lot of courage, a lot of clarity. But when we get to that place is where we can sit back and we can say, given this situation, these are my options. I'm willing to do this. I'm not willing to do that. Now, that does not control the other person. People tell me all the time, well, I've tried boundaries. They don't work because this person in my life doesn't respect them. I say, no, you haven't tried boundaries. Boundaries are not about telling the other person what he or she can or can't do. They're about what you're willing or not willing to do in reaction to what the other person does or doesn't do. So given that, you get to make choices. And when you set your boundary, the other person, your spouse, needs to make choices, gets to make choices. But guess what? When they see your bottom line and they know you're serious, sometimes they make choices that are different than they were making. My husband was incredibly stubborn in terms of changing, admitting that he needed to change. But when I was able to get strong within myself and just tell him, I love you, I can't live this way. Then I got change.
You're talking about changing the dance in your marriage. That's a phrase I've seen you write about as well. If you're dancing a two-step and suddenly you change and you start doing something else, your spouse is going to have to respond in some way. You may or may not like how they respond, but things are going to be different if you change the steps you are taking.
Absolutely. And that what we do is we do the same thing over and over again. We do the same, this step, then he takes this step, then you take this step, and then take this step. And then we find ourselves in what's called crazy cycles. And they just go over and over and over again. When one person changes a step, there has to be a different step in response. It mixes things up and it causes you to open up possibilities.
Carla, could you describe what a boundary might be? You're not prescribing this for any individual person.
Sure.
That let's say there's a spouse who, their spouse is either drinking or is into pornography, some really bad behavior. What might a boundary look like for them?
Okay. It might be, I am not willing to buy alcohol for you. I am not willing to go to parties with you where you drink. I am not willing to sleep in the same room with you when you smell like alcohol. I'm not willing to have sex when you have alcohol on your breath. Those are some. Also, then the absolute bottom line is, are you willing to stay in the marriage with the drinking happening at all unless the person get help? So one of them might be, I'm not willing to stay with you unless you go to a 12-step program and have a sponsor. Sometimes I'll tell people not good to tell the person how to get better. So a boundary might be, depending on the situation, sometimes yes, sometimes no. This is why boundaries are very individual. Sometimes it could be, I'm not willing to stay in the marriage as long as you are continuing to drink and not get help. Or with pornography, it might be, I'm not willing to continue to have a computer in the home that you have private access to. Or I'm not willing to continue in the marriage unless you go get help and get into an accountability program. Or it could be, I'm not willing to have sex with you and do anything in our personal sexual relationship that you see on a porn website.
And then the follow through becomes important. You've kind of alluded to that, but I just want to kind of go there for a second, because somebody could say, well, I said that, but they just kept doing it.
So you say no. So did you notice my boundaries? I am not willing to do something in the bedroom that you saw on a porn website. So he asks you and you say, remember, I told you I'm not willing to do that. we're not having sex now. So you get up, right? Or I'm not buying the alcohol. Hey, would you go buy me alcohol? No, remember I told you I'm not willing to buy you alcohol. Or maybe you go 2 cars to a party. When the drinking starts, you leave. So you tend to set the boundaries in which you have control of your response to the situation. If the other person does it, then you get to follow through. Now, when it comes to saying, I'm not willing to stay with you unless you get into a program, if the person says no, that's where boundaries are difficult, because before you said that boundary, you know that you're going to follow through with it if the other person makes the choice to not do the program. So if you're not ready to follow through with it, this is what you do. You speak the truth in love. You say, you don't draw the line. You don't draw the line in the sand of I will or I will not unless you're ready to follow through. Here's what you can do up to that point. I don't know how long I can handle the drinking. I'm really uncomfortable with you at parties when you're drinking. I'm not comfortable buying alcohol for you. I get upset when I know that you've been watching pornography and then you want to have do something in the bedroom that reminds you of something that you saw on the porn site. I feel really degraded. So you speak the truth in love, but you don't draw the line. You don't say I will or I will not. You literally say the process that you're going through. And people will say, but that's too weak. Okay, no, not really. Speaking the truth is an important part. So if people sometimes tell me, well, I've never said this, well, then you don't set the boundary. If you're not spoken the truth first, why would you just want to throw the boundary out? Give the person a chance to hear your truth. Give your spouse a chance to hear your truth, to hear your heart, to hear the pain, to hear the brokenness. If you have, and there's been no response, then you have to get to the point where you're going to set a boundary, because boundaries are to protect you, to take care of you, and to also set a standard for influence in the marriage.
Mm-hmm. One thing I hear in how you're talking, Carla, is giving yourself some grace to go through the process. You didn't end up in this difficult marriage by choosing to. And there were things that have gone into who you are that brought you here. So you're not going to magically in one day get out of this difficult relationship. You have to become and go through a process yourself in you changing. And that's part of how I hear you giving a person grace who's in a difficult relationship.
Absolutely. Tons of grace. I tell people in my classes, if you hear anything said that makes you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad about myself because I'm tolerating this. I'm tolerating abuse. I'm tolerating my spouse looking at porn. I'm not strong enough. I say, that's okay. I don't want to hear any of you beating yourselves up. You get there when you get there. It's a process. Boundaries, when my 10 principles, I say you can do any of them in any order except boundaries. Boundaries come at the end. Before you set boundaries, you change yourself, not them. You speak your truth in love. You learn to take care of yourself. You learn to detach with love, which we haven't talked about. Face your fears. Then you can set boundaries. When you are able to do all those other things, boundaries are the end step.
Good, good. One thing that I hear from people is saying, shouldn't I just forgive my spouse? Isn't that what God asks me to do? So what other choice do I have but to just stay here? What does forgiveness look like in a difficult relationship?
Oh, that is a good question. So first of all, people ask me, how do I forgive this person when the person is continuing to do the same thing over and over and over and over again? And I say, it's not time to forgive. It's time to set a boundary. If somebody continues to do it to you, you have to focus on your boundaries. Now, forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process. It does not happen instantly. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean that you trust a person who is untrustworthy. It means that you get rid of the desire to get revenge. But while this is all going on, there's so much emotional turmoil, especially in really, really toxic marriages, that the forgiveness, it's not time for that. The time for that is as you've worked through. One of the things that people don't understand about forgiveness is you have to count the cost of what has been done to you and what are the lingering consequences of what has been done. So for instance, if you find out that your spouse has been looking at pornography for 30 years. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, I have to forgive. Well, how can you forgive? You don't even know what he's done. You don't know the extent of it. You haven't even processed the pain. You haven't gone through the grief process. You haven't had your spouse actually admit to you the full or the full extent of what's happened. Was there massage parlors? Was there prostitution? What was there video chatting? What was it? You've got a big discovery process you have to make. And then you have to see, how have you been affected? How is this going to change your marriage if your marriage stays together? All of these things have to be taken into consideration, and you have to grieve the losses before you actually know what you're forgiving in the big things.
You're talking about forgiveness being of something that happened in the past. If it's ongoing now, that's a different process than letting go what happened in the past. And that trust is separate from that. I hear people getting confused about that if I forgive, that means I trust them again. No.
Definitely not. It's dangerous to trust somebody who has proven themselves to be untrustworthy. No, you do not do that. You have to make sure that that person has the onus on them at that point to prove that they can actually be trusted. There has to be a good repentant attitude about it. There has to be openness. There has to be willingness. And true repentance, when somebody truly repents, you will see an effort, you will see a concern about the pain that has been caused to you, and you will see remorse when there is a slip and a commitment to continue the efforts to change. If you don't see that, then you don't have somebody who's truly repentant. So if you see stuff going on in the current situation, like I said, if it's repeated, if it's one time, then you look at it, you process it. Some things are so small that we've just got to say, look, that's not even worth having a discussion over. That's a little thing. Let that one go. We're not going to talk about every little tiny thing that matters or happens, but the big things, then you talk about it, you process it. If the person can't acknowledge it and apologize, you have to make a decision. I'm not going to stay resentful. I'm not going to stay bitter about that. I'm going to let that go. But you don't keep like a tit for tat. You did this twice, I did this once, therefore you owe me something. That's not what forgiveness is. But forgiveness is not pretending it never happened in terms of being aware of what's going on in the relationship. We have to recognize patterns. We have to recognize dysfunction. I always tell people you have to identify and give the problem a name and a description so that you can be wise about what you're dealing with and know how to respond to it. That helps you to have a better plan, not be caught off guard, not be in a situation where you're reacting all the time and allowing yourself to be manipulated or allowing yourself to be abused. I mean, you've got to be aware of what is it that you are dealing with.
A lot of honesty, a lot of grace, a lot of hope also that I hear in what you're saying, Carla. And I would like to take a couple moments to talk about hope. We're not guaranteeing what will happen with any individual marriage, but if you can just give a picture, do these principles work? Relationship changing principles? Can difficult relationships actually get better?
Well, I can tell you, I can't guarantee people that their marriage is going to be perfect or that their spouse is going to become everything they want that spouse to be. However, I can just tell you there's been thousands of people that have read my books and have taken my classes, and I literally watch them transform. I have seen women in their 60s say to me, I have not had a voice in my marriage, my entire marriage. And they are saying to me, I don't know what my voice is. I don't even know how to speak my truth. And then after my class or during my class, they'll come to me and they'll say, my husband said this to me and I said this to them. And I'll say, that's your voice. That's all it is. It's just saying what comes out of your mind, of your mouth. Like, please don't do that to me, or please don't yell at me. I'll be there in a minute. Or one woman who had never told her husband what she wanted and then stood firm. And she said, what do I do? She was in her late 60s. I said, here's what you do. You tell him what you want. And then she said, he told me he'll think about it. Now what do I do? I said, let him think about it. And when he tells you what he wants, say, I don't agree with that. And she did. And he said, okay. And he gave in. She goes, that's never happened in my marriage over 40 years. That's speaking your truth, right? The hope in terms of not being so hyper focused on what somebody's doing. We didn't talk about detachment. Detaching with love is a principle I say to them. If I can teach you detachment, I can set you free. Detachment is the difference between looking at your spouse and saying, if my spouse is in a bad mood, I've got to be in a bad mood. If my spouse doesn't want to go, I can't go. If my spouse is upset with me, I've got to turn myself inside out to get my spouse convinced that, he or she should not be upset at me. I have to, whatever it is that's going on is going to bleed over into my life. No, detachment with love is like, I'm married to this person. However, this person makes their own choices. I make my own choices. This person can be in a bad mood. I don't have to be in a bad mood. I don't have to feel responsible for the mood. I didn't cause it. I don't have to fix it. And I can still have a good mood. I can do something productive. I can go to the party alone. I can go to the family gathering alone. I can go for a walk, even though my spouse is in a bad mood. I can go in a different room and do a project. I don't have to sit there and work through all this stuff with them. Or I don't have to take responsibility for the drinking. Pornography is not my fault. I'm not a bad wife. He has an addiction. He's got a problem. He's got to own it. He's got to work through it. I'm not going to take that on. It's not mine. Neither are the consequences of their decisions. They belong to your spouse. You don't have to take it on. It's not your fault that the DUI happened. It's not your fault the accident happened. It's not your fault that your spouse lost the job. All of those things. When you detach with love, you allow that person to bear the responsibility, to own the choices, and you get to live your own life, even in the midst of your marriage. Not saying I'm abandoning or not caring, because it's not that. It's not indifference. I tell people, I never tell them, don't feel your feelings. No denial, coming to terms with the whole truth, the whole gamut of what's going on, feeling it, recognizing it, admitting it, now making a choice.
Powerful. That reminds me of 12-step principles, and you've said in your website that's part of your journey. And I just have to do this. I have to say the serenity prayer. God, help me to change the thing. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You are helping people understand the wisdom to know the difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the thing that I talk about is acceptance. Acceptance is, I know in those 20 years that I spent, there was so much in this. I see this in other people in difficult marriages, especially. I shouldn't have married him. I'm so disappointed. It hurts so bad, but I love him. And I shouldn't have done this. There's so much disappointment. There's so much of a struggle with accepting reality, because we almost feel like if I accept reality, that goes back to trying to force it to change. If I accept reality, that means I'm saying it's okay, but it is not. Acceptance allows you to come to terms with reality. It allows you to admit the truth, to stop wasting the energy trying to force it to be different. So once you accept that, then you say, it is what it is. Now what? And that is a powerful place to be in, because that gets back to, I can't force him to change. I can't change the fact that I got married. I can't change the fact that we've had all these years, we've had this turmoil and these problems. But when I accept that that's what I have right now, now I can make choices, powerful choices for me, for the marriage to be different. They have to do with the future.
I think that's exactly why you call your ministry and website and book Change My Relationship. ChangeMyRelationship.com. And Carla, I want to give you a moment to talk about your new book that is coming out. And I just have to say up front, I think this is going to be perfect for people to get before the end of the year, because start this on January 1. Just let people know about that.
Yes. Well, my books that are for difficult relationships, 10 life-saving principles for women in difficult marriages, and When Love Hurts, 10 principles to transform difficult relationships. Those are on Amazon, on my website. But I have written what I call the culmination of all the years of personal struggle, personal difficult relationships, and ministry. And that is Change My Relationship, 365 daily devotions for Christians in difficult relationships. It is for all difficult relationships, not just marriage. It's for men and women. In the back, you can either read it one day at a time, like you said, start January 1st would be awesome, or you can go to the back and there's a topical index to look up what you're dealing with and find all the readings on that particular topic. I had several of these that I read for 20 years in my recovery journey that were not scripture-based. This one is a scripture, a reading, and a short prayer. Mm-hmm. And this is literally all of that wisdom, all of that experience put together in little nuggets. And I know people will love it.
I read through some of those topics like changing the dance or trying to change your spouse or boundaries or forgiveness or spiritual abuse and a whole lot more. I want to thank you, Carla, for doing this work, for being open with your own journey and story, and now helping so many others experience change in their relationship.
Yeah, can I just give them real quickly? I'm sorry, I forgot to say the link. If they want to pre-order the devotion, they get a free 5-week audio, downloadable audio study. That's a class that I have taught along with the pre-order. So that is on my website, changemyrelationship.com/pre-order, and pre-order has a hyphen.
We'll make sure that link, including the pre-order specifically, is available in our show notes. Thanks, Carla, so much for who you are, for being with us today, and may God richly bless you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, your relationship does not have to stay the same, no matter how broken it is. ChangeMyRelationship.com, and you'll find the links to the resources we mentioned in the show notes for this episode as well, or pre-order her book, Change My Relationship, 365 Devotions for Christians in Difficult Relationships, and get the audio teachings as well. I cannot think of a better decision as 2020 comes to an end than to learn what you can do to change your difficult relationship. It is possible. I just want to say, from my perspective, that I have seen God do absolute miracles in relationships that seemed hopeless, marriages marred by addiction or abuse or violence or infidelity, betrayal. Absolutely, God can change the most difficult circumstances. But it doesn't come by sitting back and begging and pleading and waiting for him to do something. Neither does it come by trying to manipulate your spouse into becoming different. It comes by putting the principles we talked about today into practice. To focus on changing yourself and becoming the kind of person you need to be. And that's actually a powerful piece in giving God the opportunity to change your spouse, to becoming an invitation for your spouse to change. So I want to invite you to take advantage of some of the resources we talked about and check the show notes. I certainly know that Carla's principles can help your relationship change. I would also invite you to tell a friend about this podcast. If Relationship Prescriptions has meant anything to you at all, I would love you to tell somebody else about it. That means so much to me, whether it's a comment on social media or rating in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, a comment, send me a note. If there's a question or a comment, maybe something you'd like to hear on an upcoming episode, just go to our website, use the Contact Us page. I love hearing from you. Thank you for being part of our podcast family. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.